Hi everyone, thanks for joining us.
Again.
Again, one thing we want to say for anyone who watched our tour of our own house this morning, I forgot to mention that Pauline Amon designed our garden. So I feel very remiss that I didn't mention that. So I'm just telling everyone now.
Okay, so this is our office and we're going to show primarily one project today, which is a Toorak College Swift Science Centre.
Which is in Mount Eliza, not in Toorak.
And then we're going to also give you just a bit of a preview of a couple of projects that are almost complete. Yeah, just they're interesting in that they have some similarities, but they're quite different as well.
Just about the chat question?
Yeah, so we'll try and monitor the questions. Like if you've got questions...
We'll try and answer them as we go through, but we'll also just hold some to the end, and whatever we can answer as we go, we'll answer them at the end if we can.
All right, so we might just get going.
So do we introduce ourselves?
Oh, sorry, Rob McBride.
And I'm Debbie Ryan, and we're...
And technical assistance by Manning.
Yeah, Manning McBride's here as well, our son, who's also in the practice.
Okay, I think everyone can see that. Okay, so this project is the working, mate?
Sure, this working fine.
Can I get the pictures on the side?
Do you want these or?
No. So it's the Terrick College Swift Science and Technology Centre, which was finished, remind me, Deb?
Not that long ago. Time doesn't mean much to us. We go from one project to the next. And it's all about the projects.
Late last year.
Yeah. The girls are certainly using it now.
Yeah, so Terrick College is a girls' college. It's actually not in Toorak, it's in Mount Eliza. It's called Toorak College because it originated in Toorak. And interestingly, the last pandemic, the Spanish flu pandemic, was partly the reason why the school relocated down to the peninsula.
Yeah, they thought it'd be healthier for the girls down in Mount Eliza.
So it didn't happen immediately after the pandemic, but the pandemic was a kind of a catalyst to them moving down. So they found this beautiful site down on the peninsula at Mount Eliza. It was then quite a rural setting and had fantastic and beautiful views over the bay. And it was very much about the connection with nature was one of their main motivations.
In a natural, healthy environment.
So this is a picture probably from about the 1960s, I think. Whoops, I've skipped a bit far. This is the site, if you like. It's the main building, or one of the original buildings was this building here, if you can see it right in the middle. It's a very symmetrical looking building. That's called the Hamilton Building. And that was one of the, when they moved down there, probably their main building, which was a schoolhouse and a boarding house. And you can see over the years that there's been many additions to that campus.
And the same architect designed the shrine.
I think we've got some pictures of that. So one of the things, when the school came to us, they talked about the importance of STEM, and particularly the importance of STEM in a girls' school setting. So this graph, a little bit hard to follow, but basically what it's saying is that all the jobs through the middle are getting hollowed out. So the increase in employment is all towards the top end.
Skilled areas,
the skilled areas.
Highly skilled areas, and very, very low skilled areas.
Low skilled areas. So this is part of the imperative of why STEM is so important. And the other thing that they were clear about was that the girls' representation or women's representation at university, and more particularly in the profession, was way too low, and that needed to change. And they wanted to be part of that change in their school.
And so they did, sort of talk about getting involved with industry and things like that, and giving the girls every chance to move into STEM type education, further education and jobs.
And as Deb mentioned before, the architects to the original Hamilton building were Hudson and Waldrop, which are quite famous architects in Melbourne. So they did the Shrine, which you would know, beautiful building, very, very clever superimposition of two types of building. They also did other buildings. One of our favourites is this
Alkira House.
Yeah, which is a beautiful black glazed Art Deco building. So their work ranged over a wide variety of styles, and we felt very privileged to be in that company, if you like. So this is the Hamilton building. Not quite sure what style you would call it, sort of Scottish baronial or something, but it's a very beautiful building, symmetrical, except it does have a sort of asymmetry about it, which gives it a sort of picturesque quality.
Beautiful gardens designed by Edna Walling. That's probably another significant thing.
Yeah.
Great female landscape architect.
Yeah, so this is
designer.
Yeah. So this is the other side of the building, the west side, and it's built around this courtyard space. So originally, as we understand it, upstairs were the dormitories for the girls and mainly teaching spaces and administration downstairs. This part of the colonnade is what the school calls the Long Walk. So it's this connection across a series of buildings on the campus, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. Now, this is not the school. This is work by a famous English architect called Edwin Lutyens, and he was a classical architect, a Mannerist architect, but he also did these country houses, which were very interesting because they had a number of sides to them, and one side might be very symmetrical and the other side very asymmetrical. And this combination of symmetry and asymmetry we found very interesting, and we saw the parallels with this building, which is not too, they are contemporary, if you like. The other thing, as Deb mentioned before, the original garden was done by Edna Walling, and these gardens in Lutyens' houses were done by Gertrude Jekyll. And there is, in a way, I guess Edna Walling is our version of Gertrude Jekyll. We also put this in, this is the cathedral at Syracuse. Probably many of you have seen this, but what is so fascinating about this cathedral is it's actually a number of different types of buildings. So it started off originally as a temple, so a classical temple, and then evolved and into what it is now, which is essentially a Baroque church. And you can see all the layers of different styles of building, and you can even see them in the facade where they're superimposed across each other. And what we liked about this building, and this approach, I suppose, to urbanism is that buildings can be many different things. They don't have to be just a single object. They can actually be complex objects that try and respond to different conditions and
have many layers, and possibly even different facades.
Sorry, skip there. So this is the site plan, the original site plan. You can see the Hamilton building in the middle, and one of the original buildings that they brought down, which is a prefabricated building, which was called the Elephant, so named because apparently it was a white elephant. So a lot of the board members didn't particularly like that building, but they did bring it down because it was able to be prefab. And you can see some of the gardens in the original site plan by the architects. And then the way the plan, you can see the Hamilton building there in the middle, and the way it's evolved. Different types of buildings. So some of the buildings are very respectful in their historic nature, but some of the other buildings are a bit more contemporary. So one of the things, if you want to jump in, Deb, I'm talking a lot, but I guess one of the things that we were keen to try and preserve was the relationship of the building to the outside world, if you like, the image of the school, that it had a sense of consistency about it, which was really generated by the Hamilton building.
And a sense of gravitas.
Yeah, I should say that this is the location, here if you see the cursor, of the new building. These are some pictures of Edna Walling's work, which was picturesque, but it did employ a lot of Australian native in
her gardens,
in its realisation. And this is hanging on the wall in that Hamilton building. This is her drawing of the original landscape. And you can see how the landscape is a bit of a counter to the building, with sort of sweeping paths and, you know, beautiful romantic gestures. And so that became a real generator for us, didn't it, Deb?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, we wanted to follow those sort of and desire lines of the Edna Walling concept.
So we wanted the building to, as we mentioned before, to be respectful of the tradition that was already there, but then also to pick up on these sweeping paths and even start to extrapolate and think about how this building could be seen as being almost part of the landscape. And this is the long walk. So one of the things I think about doing a STEM building is to try and integrate it in the campus. So
exposure is the greatest, you know, with all the students.
Yeah, that's right. So to try and make it a natural path that all the students would walk through, so that science wasn't this sort of subject that was too esoteric or something and you couldn't enjoy, but to actually make it as a natural part of the campus
and as active as possible.
And so this, as we mentioned before, this is the actual location of the long walk. So the connection of the long walk and the way that it could connect back through and into the building was very important, and then basically connect the east and west sides of the campus together. So it became sort of linchpin across the whole of the campus. I've actually rotated this the other way, so it might be a little bit confusing. So this is actually north towards the page. In the previous slides, we had north towards the right. So still that idea of the connectivity, Deb, that was important that we had these sort of entrances, like celebrated entrances, if you like, to the building was an important aspect, wasn't it?
Yeah. And they connect up to art and also to the early learning.
Yeah.
On the west side.
So we started to think about the building as being two parts, if you like. One side of it was more of a, I guess, a more formal, structured learning. And then the other side, more open, flexible, collaborative type learning environment. And the idea of having these two different types of learning spaces worked in conjunction with the way that we were starting to think about the architectural form, which was, again, a building made of two parts. And so you can see the building here, the way this is disassembled, if you like. So we've broken off the south facade here. So the south facade is very ordered and respectful and does pick up on some of the, I guess, materiality, some of the themes of the original Hamilton building.
Although it is much more techno in its imagery, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And then some of the structured learning spaces, which we'll talk about, and then the more unstructured spaces, and then the northern facade, the north gesture, if you like, back towards the heart of the school. And it was that north gesture which was to be, I guess, the sort of inspiring aspect of the building, to give it, to really underscore the importance of STEM.
It was also meant to be fun as well. So basically, the area that you do walk through, that is the continuation of the long walk as sort of Rob described it. I mean, there all sorts of fun activities can happen there, like robotics and, we've got a green room, we've got, well, the labs are on show as well. So there is basically a, at the other end, there is a series of steps, which are also a sort of, well, not an auditorium, what's it called? It's
yeah. I think there's photos.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a minute. But basically, you'll see that we're trying to make it as active and fun as possible.
So this is the model that, if you were tuned in earlier, you saw on our bench. And it's really that big sort of north gesture, that the sense of kind of embracing and generosity that we're trying to get back to the school. These are some drawings showing the east and west, which we'll go into more detail. But basically on the east side, one of the aspects of that is that actually has an open laboratory area, so an outdoor laboratory area. And again, one of the models that's currently sitting in our house, showing that outdoor lab area, double height space.
Spiral stair.
So one of the things that, when we sort of developed this over a number of projects that we've worked on, but the idea is sort of, how do you integrate a building and how do you make it a sort of an environment in which people can learn? How do you facilitate and sort of accelerate learning? And particularly these types of environments, STEM type environments, I think this diagram sort of describes the process of learning quite well, which
we think is the way, you need to encourage people to learn, really.
Yeah, so we see it as a kind of a cyclical thing, where we've got what we've called as making, and in this case, making is working in a laboratory doing experiments, or working in a Digi Lab building a robotic arm or something like that. So the actual the importance of actually a sort of hands-on, practical construction, if you like. And then after that process, there's this kind of process of trying to understand what you've done. So it's a sort of distilling the information that came out of that, talking to your colleagues and your teachers about what you have found. And then there's this idea of displaying, that all this activity and the things that you have made can get put on display, so that it actually, again, creates more of a sort of discussion about the work itself. And then you move back into the making again, and it's this cyclical process that solidifies learning and understanding. And the way that we've tried to facilitate that is to use a whole catalogue of different types of spaces.
And arrangements.
Yeah, and a lot of those spaces are about, in particular, that sort of discussion and display area. How do you actually facilitate students to get together and teachers to get together, and how do you create different environments? Some that are small, some that are larger, some that are completely informal and accidental, but some that are very purposeful. And that idea, we talked about the idea of display, so having opportunities for students to put their work up. But I think, and Deb just touched on this before, the whole idea of this building was to be about display. So everything about the activity that went on there was meant to be exposed to the students.
So someone sees something else that someone else has done and they react and take it further, or it actually, just promotes, it's thought-provoking.
This is the floor plan, the ground floor plan. And you can see some of the structured spaces on the south side, and then this open sort of collaborative space on the ground floor, the thing that they called the streetscape. And that was the space that we wanted students, just on a casual basis, to walk through, to see what was going on in laboratories, and just to move through that space and kind of enjoy, get interested in STEM subjects. Down here we've got a Digi Lab, there's a physics lab, and then a common lab which is used by all the students in the school. The Digi Lab has an open door which is connected back to that outdoor area. And that's
an outdoor biology lab, if you like, as well. So, outdoor learning can occur. It's just it's basically a veranda space.
And then you move to the top floor, and it's a similar type of thing, except these laboratories, which are mainly for senior students, they can also be combined into super labs. They're also divided in two ways. So you've actually got a practical area with all your practical benches and things like that. And then you've got a more sort of collaborative area within the laboratory itself. And then there's a series of teaching spaces and other seminar rooms. And there's one room up here which we'll show pictures of. Do you want to talk about that room?
Oh, yeah. What was very important to the school was that girls get used to being in a boardroom. So they were very quite sure of themselves and that they wanted a boardroom in this building. And it will be used as a boardroom, but it is also for girls to just get used to being in a boardroom. So it was, you know, encouraging the girls to take their place in a working environment and get used to being in a power position.
And one of the things you probably would have noticed about the floor plan is that they're not the same size. So the first floor plan is actually bigger than the ground floor plan. So there was this sort of mismatch between floor plates, if you like. And then you also may have seen in the plans an open lecture amphitheater that we included into the project, which was part of the brief. And you can see in this cross section here, the start of that stepping. The consequence of this was that, as I said, the first floor and the ground floor didn't match. But this fed nicely into this formal response, both the lecture theatre, the fact that the floors didn't match. But the northern facade is also an ESD response. So instead of having a building on the north which has lots of sun shading on,
it's a natural veranda.
Yeah, by raking this building, we could get the sun shading that we required, but have a very simple and beautiful form. And this is how the form was realised. It looks quite complex, but in some ways the geometry is quite simple. And
simply a cut cylinder, tilted.
And I think one of the other aspects that we were keen to put into this building was some of this simple geometry. So the building itself, again, just embodied that sense of excitement and interest in mathematics and shapes and forms and you know, how geometry is generated. And we wanted the building to embody that. So yeah, so what the facade is essentially a cylinder, and it's just simply rotated on its axis. And what that did is allowed us to get what would otherwise be a very complex facade quite simply realised.
Wasn't so simple for the builder, but
no, and we had a very good builder, LBA, on this project, who was great to work with. This is an unravelling of the facade. So if you lay out all the pieces and lay them out on a sheet, so you unravel the cylindrical shape, this is what you get, and this is how the facade was all worked through and generated, so that it all worked in as rational a way as we possibly could. Each one of these panels, where we could, we made them exactly the same size. And then I think it's a sort of counter facade is the southern facade, isn't it, Devon? You were talking about this being techno-Gothic.
Yeah, that's right. Much more technical in appearance, I suppose. It's imagery.
Yeah, so it picks up on the brickwork that are in some of the older buildings on the campus. It also picks up on this idea of sort of the large vertical window and the coining that you get around some of those windows, the framing that you get on the outside of the windows. But we wanted to do it in a slightly different way.
Bit Pac-Man-like.
Yeah. So this was all realised in a precast panel.
With brick slips, brick facings set into the concrete.
And one of the other major elements of the project was this ceiling that we put on the first floor. And this ceiling was...
it's really a nod to Edna Walling.
Yeah, so it was generated off basically floral and leaf forms.
Which is, you know, we were also wanted to say that actually science is very close to nature.
Yeah, so again, we're reinforcing the different aspects of STEM, that STEM has so many aspects to it, and biology and nature are, again, one of them, as well as geometry, as we've described before. And we wanted this space to be almost like an extension of the garden.
That's actually a laser cut ceiling with an acoustic blanket behind it.
So here's a view of the new building. You can see off the right the Hamilton building. And it was very much, this building was very much about being, what would you call it, a companion building, if you like, to the Hamilton building. So it did have a play of symmetry and non-symmetry, exactly as the Hamilton building might have.
And I like this image because it actually shows how close to the sea this school is. So it was all about bringing those Toorak girls down to the sea and down to the healthy environment.
Some views of that south facade. Intricate brick pattern.
It's almost fabric-like, except it's out of bricks.
And then the view of the south facade. So these are really just a series of views, and you can see how that sort of geometry of the panels worked out, and it gradually has this sort of interesting effect as it moves further and further away from the centre.
I mean, the thing is, it's not really showing there, but the glass is quite mirror-like at times, and when you're walking past, you can see these sort of multiple images of yourself as you're walking along. There's a lot of sort of secondary, there's layers to this building that you can pick up, you know, more and more things as you walk through it.
And I guess you would have guessed what the nickname that the girls have given to this building. I probably don't need to tell you that. This is the outdoor laboratory area that basically connects back to that Digi Lab. The day that these photographs were taken was one of those incredibly stormy days where the sun just peeked out for about
2 seconds.
2 seconds. Moving closer, looking at that laboratory area. The spiral staircase. So there's another number of ways where the first floor and the second floor are connected. One is through this spiral staircase. There's a more conventional staircase. And then there's the open amphitheater area. And then moving into the building itself, this is the sort of open streetscape. And you can see that laboratories are meant to be almost like shop fronts. So just sheer glazing all the way through all the laboratories. So everybody who's walking past can engage, can see what's going on. And again...
And that wavy central spine, I mean, you know, just through building form, I think we've made it look like fun. We hope we have anyway.
On the right-hand side, I think there's a photo coming up. There's, what would you call it? When you put the glasses on.
Virtual reality.
Virtual reality room.
VR glasses.
So that's a little fun room, a closed room. That's looking up that spiral stair. You can see the start of that Edna Walling ceiling. The Digi Lab, looking back into that open laboratory area, the way that can engage. And I guess they thought that a lot of these students would be making robots and different objects that would be sort of running around the school. So the idea of having the indoor-outdoor was important to them.
Well, also the idea of having a double height space down where that spine is as well does allow you to do large robotic type works.
And so this spiral seating is configured for different conditions. So some areas where students can get together and huddle together closely and discuss each other's work. Others
not at the moment, though.
Not at the moment. No. Other times just casually sitting. Yeah, it is a little unfortunate. We don't have a lot of photos of students in there because the shutdown did happen shortly after it was opened. It's unfortunate, but the senior students are in here now. That's it.
And there's Rob. He can't even think of the name of the glasses,
No,
but there he's got them on.
No,
No, I know, we know it's VR.
Whatever it is.
And we did try VR when we went for this job because we won this through a limited competition, and we took the VR glasses and everything down there so that they could all see exactly what our proposal was going to look like. But of course it didn't work because it was very early on, but they said they admired our ambition. So I think it's a good lesson and always have a go.
So that open staircase amphitheater area, so they have they have had little presentations and lectures. They have some visiting presenters who come into the school. There's a giant audio screen there, which basically allows for significant presentations. But again, there's that idea of this space being about different forms of display, whether it's physical display or electronic display. Down the end is a periodic table. It's a type of table that was, I think, invented in the 40s.
It's also the donors board.
Also becomes the donors board, yeah. So getting the parents and donors to engage with the idea of science as well is very important to them. And you can see that walling ceiling. That's looking back at the VR pod. And looking back towards the school, you can see the Hamilton building in the distance there. So this is sort of I think it's sort of midwinter when the sun was quite low, where the sun does come into the building. But as you move towards summer, that shading kicks in. There's that periodic table and then objects on display, as well as the shop fronts, as we've mentioned before. The staircase, moving up through the building, up towards the top floor.
And there's the boardroom.
So
And that gets a wonderful view of the bay and also out over their sporting facilities. And back to the Hamilton building.
and I think these few shots just show the laboratories. The way the laboratory is broken into the two areas, and we've just used colour to sort of describe them. So some we've got that sort of deep azure blue, which describes the practical area, and then the more, I guess, collaborative type area is just in the plain grey.
Well, a lot of the written work would go on the other half, or computer work.
A seminar room down the end, again, this idea of exposure, so you really can see into every room except for that VR pod. That's the seminar room. And then looking back along the first floor streetscape. And then looking down, back down that
Spiral stair.
spiral stair. And then popping
Coming out the
down
west end.
The west end, yeah. So that's our Toorak building.
Before you start on the next
Yes.
one, I'll just do something quickly. It's recording.
All good?
Yeah.
Little technical work here.
So we're still going to continue in a minute.
All good. Got it.
All right, yeah, so we thought that we would also just show you, and we've posted some of the photos of two projects that we're working on. They're quite, well, actually one is a little bit larger than the other, but they're small single-story buildings in many respects. One of them is a school, a music school that we're working on, and the other one is a little hospital, little integrated healthcare centre in Yarram, which is in Gippsland. They both have a sort of, they share, you'll see that in the way that we've generated the form, they share a sort of a geometry, but the manifestation, the way that it's realised is completely different in both projects. So the first one we thought we'd talk about is the Pemianism Grammar School, the music centre. This isn't it.
No, this is a previous building that we'd done for Pemianism Grammar Junior Boys School, which we call Hogwarts.
Well, they call it Hogwarts.
They call it Hogwarts. We now call it Hogwarts. But it has a facade with no windows in it, so it's like a silhouette.
Yeah, so this building, this was built in 2008 on the junior campus in Essendon, and it has two main aspects to it. One is, as Deb said, the silhouette, which was based on a very famous Edwardian Federation home. Federation homes it really is characteristic of the area, and this was based on that silhouette. And then there's the interior learning spaces, which are almost the complete opposite of that outside. And part of the idea behind this was that sort of idea which is described in the Little Prince, that children see the world differently. So when the adult might see the outside world, might see this as a hat, the child sees it as something completely different. They see it as a boa constrictor that swallowed an elephant. And that playful idea between the perception of an adult and the perception of a child, I think, was something that's very interesting. The idea of engaging the imagination.
So that's what we were trying to do. So that's why we don't really mind the idea of the Hogwarts, because we think that isn't, you know, it's stirring the imagination, and that was the aim.
So this is the streetscape in which that was built, and part of the reason it was built because the campus is right up against this residential streetscape, and in fact, over time they've purchased a number of the houses and they use those houses for various things. This building next to the building that we built is actually used by the school. They use it as a music house for the junior boys. And this is sort of gives me so they invited us to work on this in particular because we worked on it. So they knew that there was an important relationship between the house. This shows you the aerial. So that's the building we built in 2008, and below it that's the existing Victorian house, and then next to it, this is the addition that we added. So we renovated the Victorian house and added this addition. And the space that we created between the two buildings was very important. This is a very important play space that they saw for the campus. And this just shows you the floor plan. So really all the rooms in the old house are taken up as different type size studios, yeah, as well as a teacher's area. Then additional studios within the extension, a number of services such as toilets, kitchens, that type of thing. And then a larger classroom where they could have big
performance. They could also
tuition.
have some parents to watch, you know, the music that the children have learnt.
Yeah. So part of the idea of this project was, or the attempt, was to try and embody this sort of sense of music, you know, within the building itself. And we started off with this idea of kind of like
Rhythm.
Yeah, but a series of sound waves, if you like. And we were interested in the way that those sound waves, if you like, interfered or were affected by this plan. So this is a flat elevation. You can see it's a very regular view, but when it hits that curved elevation, it becomes something completely different. And we thought that that had a kind of an interesting analogy to the way that music and sound would work. And this is the way, so you can start to see, if you look at it in elevation, you get this completely ordered facade, but then it takes on this really interesting rhythmical quality as it hits that other curved facade. Lots of the buildings that we've worked through at Pemianism Grammar School, such as the one we just showed you, use a lot of glazed brick. That's sort of became...
It's from Yarram. It's a local product.
Yeah. It's a product we really like, and we use it in completely different ways throughout the school. The buildings are completely different, but they have this sort of similar materiality that keeps echoing through the campus, which we quite like. So some of the views. So it's quite close to being complete. It should be complete in the next few weeks. That stage they were still struggling with some elements of the design. So we've
explained the theory behind the building in much greater detail in written format, which haven't you picked that up again?
I think we're going to post it on Instagram, aren't we?
Yeah, we're going to post it on Instagram.
It's not so much theory, but we've told a little story, which I think you might be interested in.
Might be amused by.
So this is a little veranda area which basically connects some of the studios and service spaces, and also connects the older part of the house basically back to that new classroom area. And this idea of, you know, the way it sort of recalled different types of string instruments was also really interesting to us. So this space will become the classroom.
Or the performing room.
Yeah, but it was also important that this became a small performing area so that the students could perform to their parents and have little concerts and things like that. Some of the new studios that are almost complete. There's another one of the studios.
Here's the builder.
A long-suffering builder.
He's smiling, that's the main thing.
And then you can see the relationship between the 2008 building and the new building, and the way the buildings together frame that central space. So that's just a glimpse of that project.
Now we're on to Yarram District Health Service, which is an integrated health service or healthcare centre in Yarram.
So
there's the original building?
Yeah, so that's the original building, which was painted by a local resident of a photograph, which we haven't been able to find the photograph, but it was a very nice painting. You'll see as we move through the photos that this roundabout area, this drop-off area still remains. The building essentially remains. Some of the veranda area isn't quite what it used to be, but it had this lovely little delicate veranda on it. It was all realised in red brick, which is an important aspect of the project. And Yerim is, it's just a town of 2,200 residents, but it's a very interesting town. It's got some wonderful and quite unique buildings all throughout the town. In particular, I think this courthouse was quite an interesting building, and quite a surprise when you go down there. So there was, but a lot of these buildings are from another era, but there's wonderful ambition and expression within the buildings.
For those who don't know where Yarram is, it's on the way to Wilson's Promontory, which a lot of people do know where Wilson's Promontory is.
So many of the churches, beautiful churches throughout the building, throughout the
some of the finest
town.
Buildings in the town.
But the hotels are quite nice too. And then there's lovely buildings like this on the Butter Factory on the way in, which has this sort of lovely scrolling decoration. So we were quite taken by the town when we went there. The idea, so the building itself is here. This is the remainder of the hospital. Also has an aged care area. But it had an existing healthcare centre in that location, but it's a very, very tired building, and it's past its use by date. But the important thing about this healthcare centre is, in discussions with the management team, is that it had to be a place where people enjoyed going to. So it completely changed the mindset of what these places are like.
Because really this is about preventative health rather than just straight treatment, even though there are consulting rooms in there, but they were trying to encourage good outcomes for their community.
Yeah, so it had a whole range of services. It does have a whole range of services. It's got consulting areas, but it also has
pathology, podiatry, consulting medical suites, mental health, all sorts of things in there.
And as Deb said, it was really about trying to get people to go and see a health specialist before things became a chronic issue, and that was very important. And we have always had this attitude with health facilities that they shouldn't be just functional facilities, that they should be, why can't a health facility be as beautiful as a cathedral?
And joyful.
Yeah, or as beautiful as a museum.
I think particularly in these times, I think, joy is really important.
So we essentially used the similar footprint. It did have the effect, and we built this walkway as well. I had the effect of doing a nice sort of framing, almost a cloistering of the church next door. I'm sure go to the floor plan, but so perhaps a bit hard to see, but you do enter through this corner here. Another thing that we did was to build this veranda. This veranda was quite important, not only shading the north sun and providing an outdoor waiting area, but it was also important as a new entrance back into the remainder of the hospital. So you came down through that veranda, in through this other entry, and all the other facilities were then available in the hospital, such as the multi-purpose area where they have lots of meetings. And then you could move down through that for other services. Even though lots of the services were still in here, that entrance was very important to this design.
And we think it's particularly important now because, I mean, with, you know, you can sit outside and wait for your appointment if you wanted to. And if it's a nice day, you can just sit out there anyway. I think verandas are very underrated.
And so what we did in this project, and it does have those similarities with the music school in that we took a shape and we superimposed it across another shape. And that technique creates the most, you know, wonderful and beautiful and quite organic looking buildings. So this shape that you've got in the west facade, so this is the facade that faces the street, we took that line and we drove that all the way through the building. That created the veranda space, but also created the internal foyer and then the office area for all the caseworkers at the back. And you can see when this is superimposed across the scalloped plan, you start to see the effect of these lines running through, which create beautiful shapes. And here's, so this is a sort of, if you like, complicated view, but it's a split view where you're standing in the entrance, half in the entrance to the facility and halfway along the veranda. And
we should emphasise that this is a building, you know, under construction. It's not a finished building.
No.
We finish in the next week or so.
And one of the things that we wanted to incorporate was as much of sort of, I guess, natural materials, but also materials, things from
the local area.
The local area. So all this timber, this beautiful timber is made in Yarram. And it's a technique that they use so that they have almost no wastage, the way that they have developed to cut the timber, and it's entirely their own technique. And they are moving towards almost 100%
use of the trunk.
Yeah, use of the trunk, and almost 100% use of their own plantation. So they're at a point now where they can just recycle their own plantation timbers, and they don't have
any wastage.
Yeah, and they don't have to go into any of the forest. So that became like, oh, well, let's just celebrate this sort of this important industry that is so unique to this small little town. So on the left-hand side, you see the veranda entrance, and on the right-hand side, the entrance into the waiting area to the Integrated Health Centre. So that's just moving into the plan. You can see the plan a little bit more. This is the veranda, which connects you back down to the other facilities of the hospital. And this is the waiting area here, reception. Around here is open casework office areas. And then there's a whole series of different types of services that range from just simple consulting rooms to a little bit more high-tech treatment type rooms throughout the facility.
The open veranda?
Yeah, some views of the veranda.
Which once it's got a garden on the outside of that, the white steel, I think it's going to be very pleasant.
And so looking back along that veranda, and as they've said, we put all these seats in place so the people visiting the facility can sit outside in the sun if they like, rather than in the waiting room and wait until they get called or beeped to come for their appointment. And this is the end of the veranda. That shape continues all the way through the building. So this is the open plan office area that you're looking into. It's very reflective, but that is the open plan office area. And a closer view.
The waiting area and the reception.
So in a way, we thought this building was a bit like, we just took a little bit of DNA from that old building, that lovely little delicate veranda, and then sort of almost injected it in this building, and it became the sense and the essence.
A modern interpretation of.
Yeah, the essence of what the building is.
I mean, we've got some photos of the brick facade, Rob? Because, yeah, okay. Basically, the rest of the, like another facades are brick, and we did attempt to reuse all the bricks from the old building, so we did keep them on site. As it turned out, a lot of them were crumbling, but we did use as many as we can, and so we have actually got a pattern in the bricks which uses all the old bricks, and we did have to bring in some new bricks, but it's a combination of the new and the old. And I think that that sort of is about the idea as well. It's a combination of the new and the old.
And this facade here is also a zinc facade, which...
It's white zinc.
Yeah, white zinc, which are a very lovely material. And this, in the wet, in the rain, and on a dull day, it still looks quite beautiful. And then it really comes alive with the sun.
Oh, there you can see a bit of the red brickwork, and we've used some of the original old bricks as well.
Yeah, so that's through that patterning, we've used all the old bricks. That's that entrance back into the main hospital. There's the team. Well, part of the team.
Yeah, there's a few more.
And you can just see on the right-hand side, just the bricks embedded into the west facade, the lettering of the building. And that's the building. That's when the sun hits it, it takes on this lovely soft glow. Thank you. Thank you.
I don't know whether people ask questions during it. We didn't see them on our screen, but if you've got any.
Yeah.
All right. So if any of you have got any questions, please send them through.
On the chat.
On the chat. We'll hang around for a few minutes and happy to talk to you about them.
And again, if you watched our house before, it was Pauline Amon who actually designed our garden, and it's an edible garden. I didn't really talk about it much before. But basically it's an edible garden. We've got a lot of produce in that garden. Pomegranate tree was the lantern type tree in the back. And we've got lemon trees, we've got mandarin trees. We've got lots of vegetables in there as well. So has Marlene got a question?
No. So we can't hear.
There we go. Marlene, have you got a question?
I enjoyed the presentation. I was just going to say that you obviously love flowing shapes. I think they're rather beautiful areas to work in, I suspect, yes.
We hope so. Well, I think that, we don't always do curvy buildings, but sometimes we do. And I think it is, I think, that you don't have to have a rectangular building if you don't want one. That's the thing, I think. And it is, I think curves are good.
In the Yarram project, it was important that all those shapes went into the open plan office area where all the workers were out the back there, so that because the health of obviously the staff, mental health of the staff is as important as the way a patient feels. So it was very important to us that they had that sense of quality and they weren't just back of house, if you like.
Has anyone else got any questions?
Yeah, there's a couple.
There's a couple.
Chat. So one of them is, how long did the design process take for each building?
That's going back a while. As I said, we're not good with time. It's one building to the next.
They usually take about, a building like that will take about 3 years usually, typically. By the time you move through the design process, if you have to have any planning application, you document the building, get it out to tender, and then the construction on those buildings, really, most of them would be about 1.5 years. The smaller one is less, but they're about 1.5 years construction. It's hard to build buildings like that in 1 year. So 3 years, I would say, would be a reasonable average.
From start to end, yeah. But that's really not the design. I think the question was about how long did it take to design?
Ever evolving, I guess.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Ever evolving, I guess.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we think that even when the whole process of building, like design still happens anyway, particularly through, even though you officially have a design period, but through documentation and everything like that, I think that you are still designing, you're still improving improving the outcome as you go along, and then when you're on site as well, that also occurs. Even though you have a set of documents that the builder has to build off, there is always some questions.
Another question is, you're a member of Australian Architects Declare Climate and Biodiversity Emergency.
Yes,
What does that mean for you and your designs?
Well, what it means is we try to use local materials, so there's not great amount of transportation. So in this particular, in the Yarram one, we've used the silver ash. But particularly in our own office, it's all green energy. We always try to do passive design, eco type initiatives. So that's why I think the veranda area is very important in that Yarram building, for example. We try to recycle wherever we can. So we did recycle all the bricks that could be recycled off that. The ones that hadn't crumbled got used basically on that Yarram project. So we try and recycle whatever we can. We try to encourage the builders to use good recycling practices and as little waste as possible on the projects as well. What else? I'm just trying to remember.
Yeah, I think we, you know, there's a whole host of things that we try and incorporate into the building as much as possible. In particular, as many passive systems as we can, and as we sort of went through on the Toorak College, that does have big solar array on the roof, but the important thing was to try and, you know, embed those passive systems into the building, and become part of the architecture.
In fact, actually on the Yerim project, it's going to have geothermal energy. So using energy from the heat in the earth, essentially. So that's really quite an innovative aspect to that particular project. I don't think it's been done, and it's certainly a trial. The government's looking at it very closely, how that project works out from that point of view.
Yeah, so that, as on that Yarram project, as Deb says, there's a whole energy upgrade that's associated with that to the whole of the hospital, but it also serves that building. And the final stage of that is the incorporation of geothermal.
That's right. And on Toorak, as Rob said, that it's got a massive amount of solar on the roof, and it should be really self-sufficient. And that's the beauty of schools in particular, because with schools, you know, they're basically mainly operating between 9 and 3, which is really perfect because that's when you get the sun.
What else you got, Matt?
That's it for questions.
All right.
So thanks.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. We've really appreciated having you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Enjoy Open House. What was that?